Cindy, why did we choose emotional intelligence to talk about today?
So it might be helpful if I give you the history of emotional intelligence first, so that we can kind of put the context there and put it together. Okay, would that be all right if I give you some history? Okay, so the question that started emotional intelligence is this question of, why do really smart people make really bad decisions? You've never seen that, have you?
It's too rare.
Yeah. Okay. So some psychologists, Peter Salovey and John Mayer, wanted to answer that question. So they did some research and they wrote an article and they coined the term emotional intelligence. Okay. All right, so that's happening. They're doing this research. They're understanding emotional intelligence. And they're really saying that to make good decisions, you need more than IQ. You need emotional intelligence.
And that was only in the 80s and 90s?
It was in the late 80s, early 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. Now you have to remember that this was before the internet and the technology that we have today, as you know it, right? Okay. A couple of other things that were happening during that time. We had organizational psychologists studying what makes a top performing leader. Okay, we had a gentleman that's kind of famous for this. His name is Lyle Spencer, and he did a global study for Siemens organization, which is a large industrial organization.
Who doesn't know Siemens?
Yes, exactly. And he studied his research spanned 56 countries and 400 branches, and it bared out that top performing leaders have characteristics of emotional intelligence. Okay. All right. That's the psychology. All right. Now we also have this really fascinating thing being invented in 1990 called the fMRI, deep brain scan technology. So we have neuroscientists and neurobiologists studying how emotions are made and constructed in your nervous system through to your amygdala up to your prefrontal cortex. Okay, so that's happening all at the same time. Okay?
In two separate paths.
Yes, but the gentleman who was reading all of this was Daniel Goleman. He is a science writer for the New York Times at the time. Okay, so he's reading about emotional intelligence and top performing leaders and neuroscience and constructed emotion and emotional regulation. And he writes the best-selling book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ.
So he puts the pieces together and sort of makes this statement just based on the research that's being done.
Yes. And then the really amazing thing that I love is he's connecting the theory to the neuroscience, and he puts together a model for leaders and actually individuals too, to say not only is this really important to understand what emotional intelligence is, but also you can learn the skill set to be emotionally intelligent, to make better decisions.
Yeah.
And that's the kicker, right? Like you can improve your performance. You can be healthier. You can help your teams grow. You can lead better. You can have safety and trust at work through this model of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So why emotional intelligence matters in leadership is because the research bears out that organizations, teams have better performance. Okay. And what emotional intelligence does really is it creates safety and trust, and it helps people be in an award toward a reward state where they want to work a little harder, show up a little bit more. So we know from the research that organizations with emotional intelligence are organizations that produce fabulous products. Apple, Google, Coca-Cola, British Airways, and we could go on and on and on and on. Okay. So reputation management is part of this story too. You as an individual, if you were to change careers or change industries, you can actually go and vet an organization by their EQ score, by their emotional intelligence score. You can read about how their leaders lead. And so it really matters that leaders are paying attention to this so that they can not only keep their employees, but be an attractive place for people that are looking for work.
Yeah.
It's just magical, I think.
In the context of the skill and the skills that can be built, there's another component of this, the what you've mentioned about acceptance. Do you think people might be reluctant to lead with emotions?
Oh, for sure. People are reluctant. Not all people are reluctant to lead with emotions, but being emotionally intelligent can make you feel vulnerable because you may be using feely language at work. That's why it's an important distinction to know that it's a skill set.
Yes.
Right? Like each skill within the skill set needs training.
There has to be people who you've run into who have objections to what you're sharing, what you're coaching, what you're teaching. What do you say to them?
I can't necessarily, as a coach, say your style is terrible. Okay. We see command leadership and leadership styles that are maybe ruthless for a reason. It's often a fear-driven leadership style, and it's short-term gain. Okay. And that we see that. We see it in our politics today. We see it in our leadership today. We see it on the streets today. But I would really impress upon somebody that this is our health and well-being that we're messing with. When we're talking about fear and an away state, we're talking about stress on the body and the brain.
And those are big implications and big impacts. But we talked before even just about short-term gains that can come or short-term results that can come from different leadership styles. So you could have these big overarching effects, but also without incorporating inclusivity and wellness, are you really getting sustainable results from your team?
That's right. You're not. You're going to have higher turnover. You're going to have maybe 1 year your product is great and next year your product is terrible.
What are some of the other examples of where leaders might see emotional intelligence folded into their day-to-day work?
Okay, well, let's pull back a little bit and think about emotional intelligence as that skill set again. Okay. And we're really now maybe talking about that fourth quadrant of relationship management, right? Where leaders really need to lead and manage relationships, right? So they need to initiate work. They need to manage change of work. They need to manage conflict at work. They need to bring humor and elevation of a mood to work when needed. They need to influence people. Well, you're a leader, right? So
yeah, I'm thinking about that concept of influencing people, managing change, sort of seeing what's coming. We have a multi-generational workforce, one of the widest spreads of workforce for a long time. And to be able to anticipate that how one person in your team may react to something could be completely different than another person. And to also sort of bring your team along with things like changing technology or changing resources.
Yes.
People could react to those things in different ways, some with fear, some with excitement.
Yes.
So I can see how it gets folded into those things that I know I'm doing every day and other leaders that I see are doing every day.
Yeah, and I would say in addition to that, leaders also need to look towards the future and really check their biases and check their gut and look at the future forecast and see how the future of the marketplace was going to impact their team and their product and their process and their culture. Right. So it's super complex because leaders do play a lot of different roles, have to manage a lot of different initiatives all day long. And that's why leaders can have stress.
Yeah. And we're people.
Yes, absolutely. That's
So
right.
you're
Yeah.
kind of bouncing back and forth between those bottom two quadrants and top two, checking in with yourself. How do you feel? You might have a certain reaction that you need to be aware of before you can then communicate with your team in an unbiased way.
Right. Yeah. Checking in on your own mood and then checking in on the mood of the team or the cross-functional team or the client or, whoever that audience is, and then driving those decisions as you move through work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the more experience that a leader has, the more they're likely leading other leaders. And so there's the importance of not just learning how to engage with a group and how to manage a group's emotions, but then building in time to do that for other leaders who need to build in time to do that for their team or their leaders. So there's a lot of thoughtfulness that goes into this as well.